Hi everyone, this is Erin. Today I'm recreating this scene from What's Opera Doc, originally painted by Maurice Noble. And here's the colors I'll be using, plus black, some brushes, my illustration board, some lids for paint, and here's the original piece of work, adorable Elmer Fudd. As it turns out, this was Elmer Fudd's last appearance in a Warner Brothers cartoon. And what a great way to go out. It's considered to be one of the best cartoons. I think it was rated top 50 animated cartoons of all time in 1992, and the Library of Congress deemed it culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. I'm reading that directly from Wikipedia. Okay, I'm combining an ultramarine blue with a little bit of orange, which it's complementary color to sort of tone down the saturation a little bit. And I'm doing a second coat here, but first I'm going to draw out where that sun, that really psychedelic pink sun is, so that I'm going to paint around it. I want the blue behind the sun because I do want that to come through just a little bit to give the whole image a continuity of tone, but I didn't want to give it a second coat because why bother? That would just be wasting paint. And now I'm making the color for this, as I call it, psychedelic sun, because it's definitely not representational. It's pretty trippy looking. It's got these weird sort of calligraphic lines emanating from it. So here we go with the first coat. And this sun does end up taking me 3 or 4 coats to do. But of course, you always want the first coat to dry first before you jump in with the second coat. And I'm using a slightly smaller brush than I had planned, and it has an angle, so it's an angle flathead. And that is a lot easier to use when you're doing circular shapes. So yeah, and you can see it's still wet. Can't paint that yet. Stay away. I'm so impatient. It's really hard to wait. So I decided to draw in the rest of the composition while I waited for that first coat to dry. And just looking at the original piece of artwork here, and the rule of thumb when you're drawing out from reference, whether it's a still life or you're doing life drawing models, or from a photograph like what I'm doing, is you want to look at the reference about 80% of the time, 70 or 80% of the time. So I'm barely looking at my actual drawing. I'm just really focusing on the reference to get the proportions correct. And now here I go in with my second coat. I've added a little bit of white, which I do for each coat, just a little bit more white just to lighten it up, because I was realizing that blue is quite dark, so it really does show through. Let's talk a little bit about this cartoon, because it's definitely one of my all-time favorites, if not my favorite Warner Brothers cartoon. I thought it was Merry Melodies, which I'm pretty sure it was originally. It is a Warner Brothers Merry Melodies cartoon. It was directed by Chuck Jones and written by Michael Maltese. It was released on July 6, 1957. I was far from being born at that point. My mom was a little girl when this came out, so by the time I came around, this was already considered a classic, and it just was, absolutely brilliant. There's so many things I could say about this cartoon. In particular, Bugs Bunny dressed up as a Viking goddess and arriving on a huge white horse that has this beautiful white rump. And it sort of like sits down delicately with this rotund body, and it's the whole thing is so over the top, and it's beautiful and it's funny, and yeah, just an incredible cartoon. So if you haven't seen it, What's Opera Doc? And the story features Elmer Fudd, and he's chasing Bugs Bunny, of course, throughout this amazing operatic scenery that's very dramatic. And it's actually sort of a takeoff of a few operas. I'm reading, again, right from Wikipedia here, but it's Richard Wagner's operas, particularly Der Ring des Nibelungen. I'm not able to pronounce this properly, but The Ring of the Nibelung, and also The Flying Dutchman. So it borrows heavily from the second opera in the Ring cycle, and woven around the typical Bugs-Elmer feud, the short marks the final appearance of Elmer Fudd in a Chuck Jones cartoon. So as I said, what a great way to go out. What I'm doing here is I'm filling in the Elmer Fudd character. I love this prance he's doing off the stairs. It's so beautiful. But I'm filling it in with white first so that the orange really stands out. It's a very bright orange that I'm using. And I didn't want to have to do 4 or 5 coats, so I painted Elmer Fudd white first. And that's much easier than if I were to have left him blank and painted the blue around him, the background blue. That would have been pretty difficult. I'm mixing together magenta and sort of this orange color with white to make a peachy tone, and I'm mixing quite a bit of water in with it because this is what I'm using, the mixture I'm using for these sun rays, this sort of heat and light emanating from the sun, and it's done in this really gestural line, and I'm using a tiny brush to do it. I think this is a 1. Now this line work that I'm doing, for me it was pretty easy to do because I actually started doing line work like this about 20 years ago when I started doing illustration and I went to art school, and I realized it came quite naturally to me because I grew up with Maurice Noble's work being a huge inspiration on me and just really embedding itself in my psyche. Like I barely had to even think about it, and it is very thoughtless, this kind of line work. You sort of let your hand do its thing and you just trust it. But I think because I grew up seeing so much of that work, it came naturally to me. I don't know. Anyway, it's a lot of fun to do. And now I'm mixing together one of the best colors ever that Holbein brings out. I'm not sponsored by Holbein, but I would love to be. But anyway, so this is luminous red mixed with just a regular orange. Luminous red by itself is a little bit too cool on, I mean, it's not a cool color, but it is definitely more cool without that added orange. So I added a little bit of orange, mixed them together, and here we go. Now, while I'm filling this in, I will mention the idea of cool and warm colors. I've talked about it in other videos, but it is a question I get often. And to explain, a cool blue is a blue that's closer to the green side of the color wheel, whereas a warm blue is closer to the purple side of the color wheel. And then if you think about reds, you always think red is a warm color, but there are cool reds, and a cool red would be closer, oh, got some paint on my finger. A cool red would be closer to purple on the color wheel, whereas a warm red would be closer to orange. And here we are bringing in the stairs. I kind of mucked this up. Honestly, I should have made the paint slightly thicker. It was a little bit watered down and I kind of rushed it, but I fix it up in the long run. But I do wish I had been a little more careful. I think at this point I was getting pretty hungry. I was rushing it. There's always a point in one of these paintings, these replicas, where I get a little impatient. But yeah, back to the cool and warm colors. I was going to say something else. What was it? Oh, if you want to create a nice purple. So this is something, actually, one of my viewers, Gina, shout out to Gina, hello. Gina and I have had a session over Zoom, and we really talked about color mixing, in particular purples and turquoise colors. And purples, to get a really nice true purple, you want to mix magenta, primary magenta, with ultramarine blue. So you want to do a warm blue with a cool sort of pinky red color to make a nice purple color. And here I am bringing in this sort of castle feature using a little bit of that magenta, some of the orange mixture, and then white. And you can see there I'm mixing it up, getting it to be that nice consistency. And I've now done a few coats, so you can see it's more of a flat opaque orange, putting in a little bit of that pink tone there, and then along the stairs as well to give them more definition. Now this color, oh man, I love this. I just bought this color. Here, what is it called? Red Violet. So this is a really beautiful, bright, purpley violet. Well, violet is sort of a purple, well, it is purple, but it's more of a red purple. And it's a tough color to mix. So even if you're using ultramarine blue and magenta, it's tough to get this really vibrant, highly saturated purple color, this more violet purple. So to get this color that has really short wavelengths and is like high energy color, I recommend actually buying the color pre-mixed. So this is red violet, again by Holbein, acrylic gouache, which means once it dries it can't be reactivated, but I really love that Holbein brings out these beautiful bright colors. And so we've got that first coat down, and now I'm bringing in my black. This is when things really come together. You know, so often paintings are pretty brutal halfway through. They go through that ugly phase. And I find a lot of the time with these animated, especially from the mid-century pieces, it's when you bring in the black or the really dark colors and we start to get those crisp lines and we start to see these abstracted shapes really take form. So this is where the painting starts to get, I guess, easier to look at. So, but back to the cartoon, just one more thing. I gotta say, like, this is, I think there's a meme going around. My friend was telling me about it. I haven't seen it, but this is really how so many of us kids from the 70s and 80s learned about opera. Like, this was our first exposure to to opera, was What's Opera Doc. And there's this part where Elmer Fudd is stabbing a hole, thinking that Bugs Bunny's down inside this hole, and he's going, kill the wabbits, kill the wabbits, and he's like freaking out trying to kill, and you hear Bugs off in the distance, or you see Bugs, and Bugs is like, kill the wabbit, like what, you know, and he realizes what's going to happen. So he then dresses up as this beautiful Viking sort of goddess. And I love it. It's weird because as a kid, I remember thinking like, wow, Bugs is so hot. Like, Bugs is a really attractive. And it never occurred to me that it was weird that Bugs, because it's not weird, right? Like, Bugs dressing up as a beautiful goddess. Like, it was done in such a natural way. And I think that was a great thing for kids to see, you know, just that it was done, I guess, it is done in a playful way, which is great, but it seems, you know, it makes a lot of sense. And Bugs looks really good as a goddess. And that also brings me to this other cool fact about the plot of this cartoon, is that Elmer Fudd is actually, he's playing the demigod, which I don't know about you, but the thought of a demigod, so cool. But Siegfried the demigod, and before he finds the rabbit tracks and he arrives at that bunny hole and he's like stabbing it, he's singing that part, like, kill the wabbit, to the tune of Ride the Valkyries. So another little cool side note. And yeah, the whole thing is genius. It's genius. Okay, back to the painting. This part was super fun. Again, not thinking, kind of jittering. It's a technical term there. Another one of my technical terms, jittering the paintbrush to get those very random spots and speckles. Now, outlining Elmer here, I made a slight mistake, and that was to use straight up black. What I should have done is I should have combined black with a little bit of that orange mixture, or even red would have been good. And that's because the black really stands out a bit too much, whereas if I look at the original piece of artwork, the outline, it blends in a little bit more with the figure, and it also sort of vibrates slightly. Like, there's I don't know what it is, if it's because it came from an original cell, or because the picture maybe came from a screen or something, or there's some reason why that outline, when you look at the original piece, it has more of a red look. It kind of blends in more. Adding a couple little extra windows in there. There we go. And now this part, I love this part, dry brush. I use a very dry brush, dip it into my gouache, then pat it off on a paper towel, and we get this lovely blendy dry brush effect, doing the same with the lighter purpley color. And it's just so simple. It's really like foolproof. I'm blending slightly at the edge there, and then I get to go in and do the outlines for the stonework and the archway that would be in this tower, and then using a slightly lighter version of the same color to do the rest of the details here. And again, so loose. And I just really appreciate this mid-century work because so much of it's very graphic, but then you have these loose gestural lines that juxtapose so beautifully with this more gestural line work. And there we go. Time to reveal, time to take off the tape, which I totally screw up here. I'm like just so hungry at this point. I'm like ripping tape off quickly and not being very careful, and it rips the page and things are getting stuck. But there it is. Yay, and look at cute little Elmer, his little nose. I love his nose. Anyway, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.